Welcome to episode 338 of the Game Deflators Podcast. My name's John, and I'm joined by Ryan.
Hey everybody, here at the Game Deflators Podcast, we like to talk about games we've recently picked up, games we're currently playing, and sometimes we talk to cool people, like in this episode of the Game Deflators Podcast.
So today we're joined by Dev Madan. Dev is an illustrator with a career in video games, animation, and comics that spans 35 years. Dev has worn many hats in the industry, including an art director at Toys for Bob, the founder of Loose Cannon Studios, and art director at Sucker Punch Productions for the Sly Cooper series. His freelance clients have included Sony, Funko, Cartoon Network, Squaresoft, Warner Bros., Wizards of the Coast, Marvel, and DC Comics. And you can find all of that great information and a much longer bio at devmadan.com, and that's DEVMADAN.com. Dev, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, guys. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you.
So is there anything that I didn't cover in the bio that maybe you want to tie in some more info on?
No, I mean, I think you did a really nice job there.
Well, you did 90% of the work, I think. 95, 99 around there, and I cut it down.
I think I've just been really lucky in that, I've been able to bounce around between animation and comics and games, throughout my career. So pretty much been avoiding getting a real job, if that makes any sense. Just working real hard at it.
I see in the background there, you got some art pieces. Is that your art in the background there?
No, this is, these are heroes of mine. So the top one in the very corner with the gold frame, that's a study by J.C. Leyendecker of Abraham Lincoln. That was for the Saturday Evening Post. And then above, next to that is Martin Emond. And that's the cover for Lobo Dead Man. I was really lucky to meet Martin years ago at San Diego Comic-Con, and we did an art trade. And then underneath that is a page from Pit. I think it's Pit number 2 by Dale Keown. I've got just throughout the house, I got a bunch of comic art. Like, it's interesting. I started collecting it, like comic art, like back in the 90s when I'd go to San Diego Comic-Con, because I started noticing that pages started showing up like without lettering on it. And I was like, oh man, like something's starting to go away here. And at the time, you could actually buy that stuff for relatively, like, it wasn't like thousands of dollars. It was, $50, $75 kind of thing. So I just started collecting that stuff then. And that's before everything went digital, right? So I've been really lucky now to actually have like original pages. Like, even when I was working with DC, I would always try to insist on getting my pages hand lettered, because there's just a magic of seeing a hand lettered page, getting it back. There's something really magical about it.
And there's like a whole inking process on that too, right? When you're doing lettering. Yeah. So it's like your pencils first and then your inks on top of that.
That's the beauty of it, is when you get the original pages back, like, especially back in those days, because like this one piece of Bristol board has got like the energy of like 5 people on it, right? Like, you got the writer, who struggled to put a script together, my fumbling around, ruling it up and penciling all of that stuff in and sweating the clock to get to the FedEx deadline, and then the letterer getting the letters put down on it, then the inker going in and inking it, and then handing that off to the colorist, who would end up just doing like color keys before it goes to the computer. So you get this page back, and there's just something about it. You know what I mean? Like, especially working with my friend Keith, who was the inker on that. Like, I learned to draw like this because I'd be on the phone, talking with him, because there's nothing more isolating than just sort of sitting in in this studio apartment, working for Wednesday is what I used to call it, because that's when the editorial meetings were, so my pages would be in, and they were in New York and I'm in Seattle. So like the meeting would be over at 5. So I figured I would get a call from my editor, and the further away it was from 2:00, the better off I was, because I figured if he was going to come back and call me right at 5:00, at like I'm on his hot list and he's going to yell at me for being late. But if I got to like 3:00 or at 6:00 that time, I'm one of the last guys he calls. So I'm not in the doghouse.
Don't want to be that early bird.
Yeah, you don't want to be the guy getting a call at 2, right? But
stuff. Well, I guess that's part of a process now. Just draw like that, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, like, we're video games, and you've done so many awesome games that, we've loved and played over the years. And when you're looking at your games, like, I mean, there's such a striking like visual style. How do you approach like that visual design, for the video game and come up with the concept and bring that through to like really bring that to reality in the game?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's I think first and foremost, it's really sitting down, obviously, with a designer, and if you're lucky, you got a prototype, that you can actually play and experience, right? So a lot comes out from that, where like, what is if there is like an overarching theme, like with Sly was about being sneaky, right? Like the whole thing was about being a thief and sneaky and that. So it's really taking into account your camera and just what kind of vibe you want to set. What's the pace of the game? Is it fast? Is it a Twitch game? In that case, you want your shapes to be simpler because it's got to be fast reads, right? Or if you got more passive camera, like an RPG or whatever, you can really have like big, lush environments that your eye can absorb and detail. You know what I mean? So a lot of those parameters just sort of get baked in the earlier stages, right? So you want the art to reflect the gameplay, right? And then build from there. So the whole point of the art is to just push gameplay where it can. And then, if you want to add like a film noir aspect to it, or if it's just all action, or it's just big cartoon logic, like a Crash Bandicoot, a lot of that's driven by the team. You know what I mean? Like the team's gonna, we're all working together because we share some kind of common value or interest. There's a nucleus of something there, right? So, you sort of let that sort of come out of that is like, and then it's just really about putting together like everything from cartoons to comics to, cool wrappers or packaging even. Like I've actually used logos as something to just sort of, you just want to sort of drive this emotion after looking at it. You know what I mean? Like it's like a mood board, you just sort of put all these things that this is the vibe and we want our characters to look like this and, wants to feel like that. And for characters, what I've done in the past is I've literally put together, back in the day, I used to make mixtapes. So like, what is the soundtrack for this character?
Okay.
What is, and then the other thing I would use is dating profiles. So like for Sly Cooper, I filled out a dating profile for Sly, Murray, and Bentley. And that sort of allows you to sort of backfill in a little history, right? And you learn more about the characters like, oh, actually Sly's afraid of heights, but you're never going to know that. But that's just more real for the people working on it. And those are opportunities to just sort of keep in the back of your head as you're just sort of inserting that stuff in, right?
Interesting. And for whatever reason, I don't remember Sly being afraid of heights. It just didn't strike me, but it makes,
yeah. So that was originally put in there. Like, so Sly was afraid of heights, and then Bentley actually was like one of those, he had a phobia of dirt. So that's why he never wanted to leave the van. And again, that's just stuff that sort of sat in the background that we all just sort of had, and we discussed internally. I mean, I think in the comic, the first issue, we talked a little bit about that, Sly on the rooftops, just being uneasy or, not sure about stuff. And again, that's, you save that kind of stuff for the medium you're working in. So that's an example of like in the gameplay, most people really don't like, it's a neat little fact, but ultimately I just want to know what I got to do, where I got to go and take out the bag. Like that's sort of the impetus of it. And then, you have your bookends of like motivation and then wrapping it up. Right. But for something like a comic book where you're spending more time in the character's head and you're allowing the narrative to take over a little bit more, that's where you can explore the psychology of that kind of stuff,
Yeah, I guess you can bring that in subtly into the gameplay as well, right? Yeah. So like, the average player may not see that right off hand, but it's so integrated with that character's
you're just looking for little tiny ways to push it at different times, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and I think I think it was actually John Lasseter had a really great quote of that, which is just like, with your audience, you give them 2 + 2 and let them figure out 4, right? Like that's, that's just sort of a philosophy that I like to have because that involves the audience, right? Like you're sort of, you're playing tennis with your audience that way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, where do you draw your artistic inspiration from? I mean, I'm guessing a lot of comic book stuff because that's earlier on what you were doing, and Sly has very much of that comic book animation feel to it. And I guess how does that influence your work, even today and back then?
Yeah, I mean that kind of stuff. So obviously the comics are super baked into my DNA, right? Like, I mean that's sort of what put me on the journey to being an illustrator. Chuck Jones, Saturday morning cartoons, all of that stuff. Golden Age illustration. That's sort of my, my big soup that it started with, or the bouillabaisse before everything starts getting put in. But like, I mean, I think as an artist, you should always just be absorbing, looking at different stuff, Like, I mean, as a matter of fact, years ago, like that's actually where the Thievius Raccoonus came from. Years ago, Bill Gates acquired the Codex, the Da Vinci Codex, and it was on display at the Seattle Art Museum. And it was open to the public. And so I remember walking through there and just looking at like these super cool, the scribbles and notes and all of that stuff. And it's like, that is just the coolest thing,
Yeah.
So it's just taking in that inspiration from, all places. And travel is actually just another really great thing to just, again, you even mentioned this, like experiences. It's just sort of, just putting yourself out there and just experiencing things in life, just super random stuff. You know what I mean? Like the more random, the better, because those are things that sort of sit in the back of your head subconsciously and they just sort of come out. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And like I mentioned earlier, like I'll take inspiration from anything from like a logo, to African masks I've used, like just because of the really cool shapes that a bunch of them have, to different cultures. And, especially now, especially with the internet and stuff, like, you're 2 clicks away from studying the Taiwanese architecture or Chinese temples. And it's just all this really cool stuff to just sort of fill your brain with. So,
and then you can go into a rabbit hole easily, right? Like
oh
just
my
dive
God,
into
yeah.
like, okay, cool, we're talking Chinese architecture. We're now
Dude.
going into all of the different architects that were
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's super cool, right? Like almost to the point of being a distraction, and avoiding getting any work done that you're supposed to be doing. But yeah. And then, like I said, just all of that with an eye towards, what is this game you're trying to support, and this actually brings up a really great point that we were talking about before this recording, which is just the introduction of AI. Like I actually think AI can serve a really interesting as a tool in it. I don't believe it can be a finished. I think we have problems in that, just like legally and aesthetically and all of that kind of stuff. But I think I've enjoyed using it specifically in the ideation process and like collecting ideas, because just like I said, I have so many bad habits that are baked into me. Like my go-tos are Rockwell, Leyendecker, comic. Like those are like I will just always go there, right? So the thing that's wonderful about something like AI is it'll just throw completely outside ideas at you that I would have never in 1,000 years would have thought to put together. And then just even visualizing. I remember coming across a Pinterest page of just these beautifully rendered Art Nouveau doors and stairways. And I mean, that stuff just gets the juices flowing. You know what I mean? And I think that's a really great purpose, way to use it.
Well, I think in for like non-creatives as well, right? Like being able to punch into AI exactly what you're thinking and develop
Yes.
a concept versus having to try and script it out on paper, send it to you, who's gonna, sketch it out, send it back to the, concept art, and then we're like, we don't like that. Let's take this, and like at least it's giving that person a starting point to move forward. And
Dude,
we did that with our logo. when we were
1,000% agree with you. Like, I mean, if I was to say pirate ship right now, we're going to get 3 different ideas, right?
Mhm.
But I think, especially in the ideation phase and the beginning phases of finding common ground as a team, working visually is the best way to operate, right? Like, I would do these exercises with teams I've worked on, especially in the ideation phase, where it's you could only use found art when we're talking about a character or or an environment or whatever, because the last thing you want is a drawing ability to be the barrier.
Mhm.
So if we just use found art, one, it's super easy. Everybody can participate, right? And your only limitation is your Google foo, right? Like how good can you search for a thing? But to be able to come to this wall and put up a picture of a pirate boat, and we can all look at it and talk about what we like about it, what we don't like about it. It's too old. I don't like the rotted wood, or this is too new. Like, so we can find all of these really great things visually together. And the other really strong thing around that is if you take the pictures down, nobody's offended, right? Like, you're out maybe some printer ink, but if you had somebody that spent a week and a half drawing a picture of a pirate ship, they're going to be hurt. Like, oh man, nobody liked my pirate ship. And it has nothing to do with your drawing skill. Like, it's beautifully rendered, blah, blah, blah. But, turns out it just isn't sort of what we need right now, So that way it ensures everybody can participate, and then you can just, because it's all about collecting ideas and the bigger swath of ideas. And I mean, even more importantly, it's just people feeling like they're a part of the team and they're connected and they're contributing.
Yeah.
Which is probably even more of an important thing, and it helps align, like it just sort of helps align everybody.
I think the alignment and the cohesion of a team is probably really important there, especially in the work that you're doing, right? I mean, and effectiveness, right? And just being efficient in the process is a key component. I mean, we're talking about, and we talked about in the past, Ryan and I, where you've got studios that are in crunch time, right? Like, how can this type of stuff help to alleviate some of that crunch time? I think is critical moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's the that's the big struggle, right? And that's just, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to put a blanket statement out there, but usually crunch is just somebody somewhere made a poor decision, and didn't correct it, right? And that sort of will put teams into a spiral. Like, they either underplanned, or they made a commitment they probably shouldn't have, or or just even miscommunication or not communicating, right?
Yeah. Or unrealistic deadlines.
Absolutely. Yeah. Totally. But yeah, I'm not sure. Were we just talking about the inspirations? I'm trying to just remember.
No, you're good.
I think we covered inspirations. Yeah.
It sounds like, you've got a lot of experience with kind of, working with these teams and helping to kind of drive things forward. I mean, there's so many different departments, especially when you're looking at a game, and, it sounds like you want to try to bring everybody together, have everybody on the same page and everything. So do you find that, like, as like the art department, you're kind of like, how much of that process are you guys like pushing forward? Because like there is kind of like that stage is going to come before, the game's actually built and you can really sit down and play around it. Like, you're kind of building that foundation from that artistic side, and then having to kind of network with everybody else to make sure that all of those pieces are falling in line and working together to like make a cohesive, complementary experience.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really great point. And I mean, and in my experience, so my first game I ever worked on was an 8-bit Nintendo game in 1990, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And then and then I made even a Where's Waldo game, if you can believe it. But anyways, and those teams were like, 9 people, right? Now you're talking about like Toys for Bob. Toys for Bob was definitely the small team inside of the big Activision machine. And those are teams of like 600 people. And, if you're talking about the Call of Duty franchise or the Modern Warfare franchise, you're talking about like 1,000 people worldwide kind of thing. So communication up and down the chain and managing expectations, that's almost more of the job now, as things have gotten so splintered in terms of discipline, as opposed to previously where the teams were smaller and the games were much smaller, right? Or like, like even like that first game I worked on was like, I think it was like a 9-month production schedule,
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, we're in, we're out, we're done, we're moving on to the next thing kind of thing. And then, with something like, like you look at any of these games that are coming out now with 3 to 5 years development time,
it's longer than movie production at this point.
It really is, totally, right? And you're talking about like, work that's done in like Vietnam and India and, 18 hours ahead kind of a thing. And so I think, that, you're writing and, managing expectations up and down the chain has become paramount, especially in terms of communications, right?
So kind of bringing us back to the visual component, when you look at bringing a game to life, what is the most difficult aspect of that?
Boy, I use the Sly Cooper example a lot, only because like it's a really great touchstone for me in terms of like that is a an IP that was made with basically the same team. But all three games were made in very different ways, right? Because the first game was really about learning to work together. What are we building in the world and all of that? And then the second one is how do we grow it? And there's more of a multiplayer aspect to it, not a multiplayer, but different characters, open world. And then the third one is the multiplayer, and then the compressed timeline. So even if it was the same IP, same top level management of people, it's all they were built completely differently. And in terms of the most difficult aspect in bringing that to life, I think it's especially when you're talking about art is never finished, right? Like it's just abandoned. You just have to let it go and get, you know what I mean? You can't, because you leave it to an artist, they will tweak and tinker, like forever. I mean, I still do it. I'll have like pieces of art that are like, years old. And
my brother's an artist as well, and I purchased a piece from him a couple of years ago, and I was like, hey, I want to get that from you, and he's like, oh well, hold on a second. He lays it up on his table, and he just starts I'm like, dude, like I was happy with how it was. Like you didn't need to. I'm like, it's great what you added, and he put in a little more ink and cleaned some areas up, and
100%.
I'm like, I appreciate it, but it's like it's funny. He'll pull out his portfolio of just random stuff from 6-7 years ago and kind of plug away just random little bits, because like the idea just kind of flows at that moment.
There was a great story that I had heard about Frank Frazetta, which was he used to license his paintings out to different book publishers, like different Tarzan cover. You use the same painting for different Tarzan books or Conan books or whatever. Anyways, he was notorious for, especially back in the day, it would take like 3 months or 6 weeks or whatever to get the painting back after it would go out. And apparently he was notorious for when the painting would come back, he'd just look at it and then he'd just like erase, just like paint over this figure and change the figures and then change the colors. So if you even look at the same painting over, like you can find it online, like the painting changes the further back you go, right?
Yeah.
So
that's wild.
So
that's what you're saying is the artist's most difficult aspect of bringing it.
Yeah.
So that's the big challenge, and I think the other challenge around that too, right, is as we were talking earlier, like especially at the beginning of a project, that's where you get a lot of your experimentation, right? Like, I mean, should this be a tall character, a wide character? What's the silhouette look like? So you get to play, and make mistakes and all that. But the further you get into development, gameplay will change, but you're sort of locked into, because there's so many things that are inherent to be, to build upon to get the game to move forward. So that's the big challenge. Is the example I've used in the past is kind of like you're going into a recording studio and you only get one take for the song, right? Like it becomes challenging that way. Like, because you want to be able to, in a perfect world, you want to be able to just sort of like, yeah, this is enough to get us going, and this will hold us for a while. And then, oh man, you know what? It turns out this character doesn't need to jump as much at all anymore. So maybe we downplay the powerful legs, or whatever it may be, or maybe this character needs a jetpack. Like you wish you had more time as the game goes on to just sort of marry that stuff together. But it's just, especially now with like how long it takes to bring a high poly character together, and then all of the stuff that falls downstream of that with the rigging and the like all of that other stuff that happens. So you don't get that that tweaking as you once were able to, right? Like,
yeah. I went to art school too. I did ceramics, and like the best lesson that I ever learned from anybody is that better is the enemy of done.
Yes, 1,000%, man, 1,000%. Yeah, 100%. Like to echo that, man. It's one of the first pieces of advice I got at DC Comics from an editor there was two pieces actually. One is a good artist ships, right? You can be the best artist in the world, but if you don't ship, nobody's ever going to know, right?
Yeah.
And then the other great piece of advice I got was, if you make a mistake or there's a problem, just pick it up in the next panel. Like, keep moving, right? Like, unquestionably, Jack Kirby, greatest comic artist to ever walk the earth, right? Like, the king of comics. You look at his comics, man, some panels, the Hulk has 4 toes. Sometimes he's got 6 toes. Sometimes he's just missing a foot. You know, nobody's talking about that. Everybody talks about the king of comics, you know, who just pumped out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of issues. Like, that's the thing. So exactly what you said, man. Like, perfect as the enemy have done, for sure.
Yeah.
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 So like you've worked on a whole range of like, you know, styles and games throughout the ages, you know, all the way from like the beginning to like more modern stuff. So, you know, from your like artistic perspective, like that evolution must be like really crazy, like the advancement in technology going into the game.
100%.
So like, you know, what's that kind of transition been like from working on something like on, you know, Super Nintendo related to something, you know, like on a modern Xbox?
Yeah, the Unreal Engine and stuff. Like, so yeah, there's definitely, it's always a learning curve, right? Like, I mean, it's you know, especially like, I mean, that's just inherently the nature of the industry, right? Like, especially when it was still consoles, it was like every 5 years you just sort of shake the Etch a Sketch and you're starting with a brand new thing, right? Like, that was just sort of the cadence of it. So there was always something new to learn. And I think what's also sort of happened with that too is that just with every successive console generation, like, the teams just get bigger, budgets just get bigger, expectations just get bigger. So, you know, it's been really interesting, as especially as an art director, you know, like, I moved away from like the hands-on kind of stuff where I could actually be actively daily contributing to the game and checking stuff in or even producing concept art and stuff like that, or like in Sly, the cutscenes, like just actively to being hands-on. Because of the nature of the size of these teams, it's just you're getting further and further removed from the process. I'm not a fan of it. I like to be able to get in there and do that kind of stuff. So, you know, I mean, that's why I'll sit a couple games out, you know, and just go back to freelancing just to get my yayas out as an illustrator. But yeah, I think the approach has definitely been more about communicating, managing expectations. I think as the teams have gotten better and the technology has gotten more complicated, it's more methodical and less experimental. I'm talking about AAA games. I'm not talking about, like, because if you look at any of the Steam stuff, there's some awesome stuff happening there, like amazing stuff. Like, whenever I can, I will always say, go support the indie guys, man. Those are the guys that are going to save the industry because, like, you know, the AAA stuff, like I said, that's those budgets. More money means less risk, you know, and what's risky? Well, quirky, funny, you know, that's less of a sure thing, right? Let's
play it safe.
Play it safe, 100%. Yeah.
Well, consumer affordability comes into play there too when you start thinking about the massive budgets and the large teams that contribute to these AAA games, whereas the indie guys are, you know, putting out a great product and at a affordable price point for gamers.
There's been a decent like AA space springing up more lately too.
I honestly hope to see more and more of that, man. Like, I whenever I can, I always try to push people to support those guys. I mean, just because, one, you know, those teams, they don't have the luxury of like that extra budget to polish their game, you know, like they just need that time. And then probably the most important part of development cycle is your release to your first royalty check, if any, right? Like, that chasm from your first to second project as a development team, so many studios fall down there because you've got no more money coming in to support your studio. And so that's usually what forces a lot of closures of those studios, because, like, that's just the nature of the games business, you know, where, you know, you're sort of living hand to mouth. You know, the publisher's only going to give you as much money as you need. They're not going to pad your coffers, right? So like that's why it's always I would always just say just support the small indie guys as much as you can, because those that's where all the really creative stuff is happening, you know.
So talking about the creative aspects, right? Like the creativity kind of flowing out. When you are looking at a game and trying to decide on an art style, are there any art styles that you've wanted to explore and haven't yet? And how do you typically decide on that art style? Is it more of the team focused, as we've discussed before? Is it kind of the art director's creative mindset and what they want to see, and then having that translated through the artist? Like, can you lead us through that process a
Yeah,
bit?
I mean, so the answer, yeah, I mean, yeah, of course. There's all, I mean, there's infinite number of art styles and you know things like I would love to, you know, try and work into a game, but you know, just to reiterate what I'd said earlier at the top, which is just like um, it needs to reflect the gameplay, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it really needs to reflect it and support it. I'll have an instinct, you know, of what I would like to see, because that's stuff that gets me pumped up, and especially as an art director, you know, that's part of your job is to sell, like not only to the executives up there, but like you know the team, and get them every day, like in the long haul of production, like showing up and being the first person excited about
You gotta
this
fuel
thing.
that energy.
Absolutely, yeah. You're you know like that's your job is just you know get them hyped. You know you're the coach. Um, so you know that there's definitely all kinds of uh, what do you call it, like you know art styles and aesthetics I'd love to push, but you know what I've done in the past is I'll come forward with you know like a creative brief, just and then just a bunch of examples and a mood board, and then with the team, you know, I obviously like you know you want your input from your character lead, you know, you want your input from your animation lead, because they're gonna be coming at it to like you want to leave it focused enough to where like hey man we're going this way, but you want to leave it open enough to where they can come in and make those contributions, right? Like it's the you know and then it becomes the plate spinning and the horse trading of like the character artist wants like all the stuff in the world on this backpack. The animator's like screw that, that's a ton of stuff to have to move, right? So it's just like you know guys maybe we can come at it with you know let's find a middle ground and you know everybody's happy.
Yeah, yeah.
um, you know that kind of stuff. So there's a little bit of that, and again, as I mentioned earlier, you know, it really depends on your, you know, where your camera is. You want to be keeping that stuff in mind. You know, like if it's a fast paced game, the simpler silhouettes, the slower paced game, the richer environments. Where does that live on that sliding scale? Um, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely always, you know, I mean, I would hope as an artist, you're always looking you're constantly looking for just new inspiration and things to get you excited, and you know like what is the game about, is it about fashion, is it about guns, is it about environments, you know, like those are the fun little rabbit holes to go wandering down,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Nice.
especially when you learn something out of it, you know what I mean, that's always a cool thing, just to you know.
And you must take like so many lessons from, you know, such a big process and running into so many different things. So like on the back end, you know, once a game shipped and it's out there for everybody in the world, you know, you've been a part of this process, and in some situations, you know, you've been kind of driving that ship. So
Mhm.
how much of that like community feedback and, you know, player feedback do you kind of like reflect on personally? How much of that is, you know, you can attribute to the team? Like is it something that you're really, you know, feel is you know, speaking directly to you as feedback?
Sure. I mean, I think like any artist, right? You always want feedback, right? Like, I mean, everybody would love to, you know, I've been living in this hole for 18 months or 2.5 years. Like, you know, but you also got to temper that with, you know, those are the things that are completely out of your control, right? So I can't control a reaction or a success or a failure, but I can control the team I'm working with and how we work together. Like those are the things that I know that I can affect directly. So when I get feedback from people, like of course, you know, you want to hear what you've done. You want it to sort of guide your instincts, you know, but not direct, not decision making, because I think I think when you allow that to happen and you allow the audience to direct what's happening, I'm not going to mention the names of any of these movies, but I'm sure between the three of us, we could talk about movies where everything checks the boxes. Like, it's got all the right things. It's got a fancy soundtrack. The explosions happen every 7 minutes. Guy walks away from like, it's just all the things are there. All the set pieces are there. It's 95 minutes. It's like the perfect length, like, so all the boxes are checked, but it just feels like soulless and empty. And, and I mean, and it's not like anybody set out to make that movie. You know what I'm saying? But it just sort of, because they allow this data-driven, audience-driven thing. So, like, there's no surprise. Right. And I think as an audience member, at least when I go watch a movie, I want a surprise. Like, I want the, oh, did not see that coming. That was a cool twist. Or, like, ooh, that was a fun, take on this. And you want to see the creativity come out of it, and I feel that community feedback can be crucial in that, where it's like, oh man, that actually worked way better than I thought. Or, oh man, that did not land. They didn't, and that's okay.
I know we weren't going to name movies, but I just have to say, when you look at, we're probably all thinking the same Spiky Blue Hedgehog. When that trailer came out, that feedback that came through, if they would not have listened, if they would, there's so much to it. If they would not have listened to that consumer feedback before it went out, it would not have seen 3 movies.
I 1000% agree with you.
Yeah.
And
it turned out great.
Yeah, and it did. That's a great example. That's a great example of where the community really saved that trilogy. I mean, I can talk to you. I won't, but I mean, there have been projects I've been involved with where it was literally like the IP owner said to these directors, would you like to actually talk to the people that worked on this project? And it was literally a flat out, now we're good. We're going to do our impression of, of our take on these characters. Not surprisingly, it didn't pan out. And, I think it was one of those situations where the community, and I think as you're talking about, like, especially now, it's a very intelligent community and it's a passionate online community. Like, I mean, they're not afraid to, like, the Sonic is a great example. They're not afraid to let you know. Like, they will absolutely let you know. So I think it's, I don't know why you wouldn't respect the IP. Like, it clearly worked to get you to this point to where somebody wanted to put down money for the IP rights. So why would you throw that out? Right. What are you doing? All you're buying is a logo to put on top of the movie, right? Like, that just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and you got to stay true to the audience, right? I mean, 100%. If the audience has this expectation of what it should 100%. Be and you deviate from that so far, right, or just enough to anger them, then what you're doing is you're taking that core audience that is really going to be the driver and advocate for you to move that forward into success and alienating them. I mean, that really hurts the project right out the gate.
It makes no sense. Like, if you're alienating the audience, so who are you making that movie for?
Yeah,
right. Exactly. Like, I mean, at that point, like, what is the point of making this movie?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, the end goal is money, right? The end goal is to make money on that project. Sure. Then, if you're pissing off your core audience, they're not going to advocate for you, and you're going to see no success.
100%. And and it's just 100%.
Well, so moving into the last part of our interview here with you, is there a particular game or art piece that you're most proud of? Why? And then what type of advice would you give someone that's aspiring to be a video game artist or an art director or any of the other hats that you've worn in the field?
Yeah. So I've been really lucky that, like, there's been a number that there's a number of projects that come to mind, right? Like, I think one, I'd have to obviously say the Sly Cooper. I don't think we'd be talking today if it wasn't for Sly Cooper, right? So, I mean, that's where I met my wife, and it was just the highlight of my career. Like, there was just so many wonderful things. I love that era of gaming, that Gen 6 era. Like, that to me is like, that's peak, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's your GameCube, that's your Dreamcast. I mean, I still have a soft spot in my heart for the Dreamcast, PS2. Like, that for me was that peak era. So, that's just talking as a fan. like a Jack and Daxter fan, a Ratchet and Clank fan, Ape Escape, Space Channel 5. I could just go on with all of these, Parappa the Rappa, like all of these awesome. So that to me is a big, big era. But the other one too that really stands out for me when I think of it is the cover for Breath of Fire and Final Fantasy 3. Just because I did an interview recently with a website about it, and I think the reason that will come to mind is because that sort of kicked off my career as an illustrator. Like that allowed me to abandon my hand-me-down Amiga 500 that I'd been using, and I could actually go out and buy a little compact 386 with a turbo button to go 66 megahertz, I think the thing cost me almost like $2,000. Like it was really expensive, but
now it's a collector's item.
Oh, I totally right. Like I've joked, I would love to actually just get like a modern PC and just get like one of those little turbo buttons you can just push on it. Cause that's basically how effective it was. Like you just push this turbo button on your computer and it was supposed to make it faster. Like it was pretty awesome.
Nice.
So those would be the two that I think that really stand out. But again, I'm really, I could talk about the Young Heroes stuff with DC Comics and the Plants vs. Zombies stuff, but definitely those two I think are the highlights of my career. Just again, they're all personal. I have Loose Cannon is another really big thing that I'm proud of for completely different reasons. You know what I mean? Like, but I'm internally grateful, man. Like, just super lucky. Like it's just dumb luck, to be honest with you. Like it's super dumb luck.
I'm sure there's a little bit of skill in there. I've seen some of it.
Yeah, we've seen it. Your website's got the skill. We can see it. The receipts are there. And then what kind of inspiration or for anybody that's aspiring to be an artist, like what advice would you give them?
I think I get this. I mean, I used to do portfolio reviews at DigiPen here in town, and I'll talk to a lot of artists at cons and stuff, which is super awesome. Like I love the fact that there's just so many outlets now for a young artist, right? Like I think that's super cool. Like even as a comic artist, just go do it, like, but back in the day, you had to have your 6 samples, go to San Diego, stand in line, go to New York, like there was that. But so that's
the gatekeeping's way down.
Totally way down. Now there's a little part of it that I kind of miss, because I think it's important to have a tastemaker to be able to say, because like at this point now, everybody's a rapper, everybody's a DJ, everybody's got a band,
Everybody's a podcaster.
Right. But like there's just so much of it. Like I kind of miss the days where like if I was an adventure game fan and a LucasArts put out a game, I just knew, like I might not have read anything about it, I just knew that's going to be a great game, right? Like Beggar's Banquet was a record label that I used to follow, and I would just buy everything off of Beggar's Banquet because I just knew it was going to be a good album. So I there's a piece of me that misses that, or the expert at the record store who had the same taste as music as you, or game store who knew that you dig this game. And the fact is there's just so much of it now that it's hard to, but having said that, the one thing I try to be real with a lot of those students or guys getting started or folks getting started is that, you're competing in a global market now. Right. And you're competing with AI. So the days of here's a portrait of a knight, right? Or here's a portrait of a princess, or here's a portrait of, like, I think those kinds of days of having a portfolio of that kind of stuff, I think those are kind of gone. Like, I don't think that you can walk in and get a job at a Toys for Bob, as an example, or a Sucker Punch, or, and I mean, back in the day, I would hire people out of school on a sketchbook alone. If I could see how you would think and I saw you working hard enough at it, I'd give you a shot, and I could actually move you around in the art department. We did that at Humongous, where like, if you're an artist, you weren't really sure, I based it off the old animation system of like, man, just throw them in there and just sort of see where they sink, where they swim, what are their strengths. And then we'll just sort of, move you. And unfortunately, a lot of art teams just don't really support that anymore, because everything is just sort of like it's outsourced here and outsourced there, and then it's just sort of assembled, like a car factory, in the States. So you need to be able to stand out, right? So I think your portfolio really needs to level up, but not so much in polish, but concept and storytelling, and show that you're thinking. So your finished product, your finished illustration, great. That's super important. But I think what you actually need now is your thought process. You need to show somebody that you're thinking, and something that also is super important is to be able to, and again, we talked about this before we recorded, as an artist, you need to be able to talk to your work. You need to be able to explain it. You need to be able to present it. You need to be able to manage expectations around it. Like, you need to be doing, that's an extra step that you need to be involved with and doing that, right? Because I think that, otherwise it's like, well, I'm just going to go just plug in this, text to render, text to model, or just hire it out. Like, you need to give that art director or, lead artist the reason why I need you on my team, instead of like somebody halfway across the world who's probably going to be half to a third of your salary.
Yeah.
That's
the work
reality.
just can't speak for itself
It
anymore.
can't anymore, unfortunately. I hate to have to say that, right? Like, because I'm of that belief too. It's like, I'm just going to build a cool portfolio, and it's going to, the work's going to be, the universe will reward me, and
How important is, we've talked about this a little bit, like styles. Like, let's just say you have 3 or 4 different art styles. Like, how
Right.
important is that in a modern portfolio versus just having the artwork done, right? Or having it better, or whatever it
That
may
is a
be. Like,
great
what's,
question.
yeah.
That's a great question. I started noticing this shortly after the mobile phone explosion in like 2014, 2016. Like, there were a lot of really talented artists that just showed up. They fit the bill. They had like this Mary Blair kind of look to their work, and was like the super, and unfortunately, that's really sort of the limits of the ability. So once that, I don't want to call it a fad, but those types of games stopped becoming super popular. These poor artists really sort of out of luck. So the ability to draw, like knowing how to draw, will allow you that flexibility to move around. So you can actually go to, your super simplified Mary Blair kind of a thing, all the way to like the heavy, dense, really expressive pen and ink type style work. So the ability to really understand what you're drawing, so drawing is super key. The ability to draw, especially when you're talking about in the concept stages and talking to your work, to be able to sketch this thing out. This is what I'm really talking about. This is how this blah, 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 blah would work. And everybody's like, oh, I see. I get it. So definitely learning about that. And the other thing too that I would really try to impart on them as well is learn the peripheral. And this is actually even in the game development aspect of something that I would do on the teams, is being aware of where the work is coming from and where it's going to next, right? Like, you don't have to be a master of it, but just being aware of the discipline so you can prepare your work for this person, right? As a concept artist, maybe a front view isn't enough for the guy that's got to make the model, right? So what you probably need is some, material swatches of like, hey man, I'm thinking of these kinds of worn bolts on the tank, and I'm thinking about this kind of discarded logo, and so all those little assistant things to help the guy in the next thing. So much of the Sly Cooper style, right, came from the fact that we were literally building these environments a polygon at a time. So you really had a limited polygon budget. So I just worked that limited polygon budget into the concept art. So that's where all the big wonky trapezoid shapes and stuff like that came from, was because it was less about drawing these big balloony buildings and more about how are we using these polygons that we're building one by one. So
Yeah.
you get that jagged, disproportionate. We used to call it funkified, where it's like it looks different from every angle,
Yeah.
and take advantage of that. So
What's
Really
great is
using
it's
the limitations as like a
totally
launching
embracing
point to
yeah, exactly.
and
be
that's one of the things that
creative.
really stands out about that series as well. Like you said, like limited budget, but you guys are able to maximize that to truly make it stand out.
Honestly, man, that's creativity lives in constraint, right? Like, I mean, because with that, where you can start pushing, right?
Mhm.
Like if you were to say, "Hey, Dev, draw me a picture," I'm going to spend a year. I don't know. I'm going to, wander around, look at my belly button, and just sort of like, and just wonder
Too
what's
much
going on.
freedom.
But it's like, hey, man, I need a Batman in 2 weeks, and I need him outside in the rain. You got it. We can get going. That kind of thing. And then the other thing too, last piece of advice is, and I meant to talk about this earlier when we were talking about just sort of preserving a vision in the game. The strongest piece of advice I would give to, and super, I'm guilty of it myself because everybody gets caught up in it, but playing daily builds of the game as you're making it. It's super easy to just say, oh my God, I don't have time and blah, 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 blah. But man, like it's pretty crazy just like how many people on the team would not be playing daily builds of the game or couldn't give feedback on a thing, right? Like it's easy to forget. I mean, it is just because like everybody's got work to do, but really making sure that you're playing the builds is super important, because that way you're paying attention into how little things are like. That's where that's where the game is living, right? Like, I mean, it stopped living in the document as soon as something went up on screen. So any changes are now happening in that screen space, right?
Yeah.
So you need to be able to stay current with that kind of stuff. Because I can't tell you the number of times I'd have to just sort of like, dude, what are you doing? We cut this like 6 months ago. So
Part of that communication.
It's all about communication. Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we definitely appreciate having you on. It was good to meet you at Game on Expo, of course, a few weeks ago, and then have you join us today.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
So, of course, yeah, thanks, Dev. And for anybody that has listened up to this point, we hope you've stayed with us throughout. But you can find Dev's artwork and his various projects and resume. His resume's on there. Actually, you can see it on there at devmadan.com. But for now, this has been episode 338 of the Game Deflators Podcast. We've been joined by Dev, and I'm John.
I'm Ryan.
And thanks for listening.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks.